think it's an '08 Mini Cooper S with a turbo 1.6, and it's got an oil leak that I've identified as coming from this oil cooling line. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. You just got to pull it off and replace it. And I've already pulled off some of the bolts on this heat shield. There's 6 of them total, 3 here, and then a couple of them around the bottom. And to get this one over here out, you've got to unbolt this thing, and I think they're all 10mm bolts. So loosen those up, and you can just pull this thing out of the way. Okay, so I flipped this thing up, and I was careful to not damage the O2 sensor cable. But this bolt here, I already broke it loose. It's a banjo bolt, and it has a copper sealing washer on top and bottom that I've already pulled off. But for the video, I'd show you how I take it off. But notice how I can spin this banjo on the tube here. So there must be an O-ring in there. They compress it. So the O-ring is obviously shrunk up, and that is the source of my leak. So I've got to figure out how to get this thing off of there. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off this air supply hose to get some access. I noticed that this pipe bolts into the block down in there, so to get to it I got to make some space. Air inlet hose is now off, and visibility is still very poor. I'm going to take off the coolant bottle next. So I'm going to disconnect this electrical wire for the O2 sensor. This is how it snaps in. Well, I have the connector uncoupled, but I still gotta remove the O2 sensor, so I got the socket that allows you to remove it. Let's go ahead and take it off. But I'm going to try taking off the catalytic converter to gain some access, and this heat shield's got to go first. Let's look underneath this thing. So there is where I'm going to split the catalytic converter from the exhaust system, taking off that bolt. And then we got to take off this heat shield. Looks like there's you can't see in there, but there's a bunch of nuts, probably 10mm. I'm going to take those off. This camera can't zoom in. It's kind of a pain to use. Before I pull off the catalytic converter, I'm going to take off that O2 sensor right there. And of course, to take off the O2 sensor, you've got to unhook these wires. It's a blue connector. So I'm going to take it off very carefully and try not to break it. Okay, I've separated the lower O2 sensor, and you have to pry that red lever out of the blue box and simply wiggle it out, and do it very carefully so you don't snap it. There it is, lower O2 sensor, and there's the upper one. Okay, now let's try and get that heat shield off. Okay, using a combination of these extensions and short and deep well sockets, you're able to get these 4 bolts off which hold on the heat shield. But be warned, it's not easy. So now, let's pull off that catalytic converter. This is a part of it. Taking off these 3 nuts and then the clamp below. Notice the heat shield's still in place. It's loose, but it can't come out until I drop this thing out of there. With those 3 nuts taken off of the flange, and then the V-band removed, and the nut on this stud, and that stud removed. This thing should now come out. Wrong, it won't come out. So you gotta loosen or take out these nuts right behind this stud and behind that stud. What that will do is release the other bracket which holds the catalytic converter in. So I'm going to try that next. Finally, it is out. Here you can see the brackets that had to be taken off of the block. There's the passenger side, the driver's side. That nut holds them on. This nut goes to that stud, and it is now off. Here we go from the top view, and I got that heat shield out. And looking up inside, catalytic converter removed. That's what it looks like. So I have a hunch that once I pull this remaining heat guard off, gotta pull that bracket off first, I will then be able to see where that other end of the oil feed hose bolts to, finally. And here we go. Yes, cover is off, and there you can see that line that comes in. If I can touch it, it's that guy right there is the end of that hose. So I can now take that son of a gun off. So this has been kind of a tough project, which can be done as long as you're patient and just take your time. You can do this. So there it is. I got it out. I had to put a slight bend in the pipe to extract it, and which is fine because I plan to use a different type of oil feed line. This one is from Detroit Tuned, and they sell a really complete kit with all the hardware, flexible stainless supply tube, and all the banjo fittings. And that's how I'm going to do it. So while you're at it, you can also pull off this water circulated oil cooler. Simply has 4 bolts that keep it on the block, and then this piece here bolts onto it, and you can replace these 4 gaskets. I guess you can call them gaskets. They're actually O-rings, and so I would recommend doing that as well. I didn't cover it, but if you've gotten this far with this hose removal, you can probably handle this job too. So with those 4 O-ring gaskets installed and this cover torqued on, flip it around, and then you want to replace these rubber seals, which I have right here, and then looking at the engine block, here is where it mounts, and you can kind of see the 4 bolt holes where it attaches. So I have a warning for you. When you hook this pipe up, especially this end to the turbo housing, make sure you push this thing all the way up in the turbo housing before tightening up this bolt. If you notice, you only got so much thread, and when I was putting this new pipe on my engine, this wasn't fully engaged, so I was torquing it, and this short bolt here took out some of the threads, so I had to go and tap the hole deeper and take a longer bolt. So be careful of that. So here's how I routed this new oil supply line. There's the banjo fitting with the supplied bolt, brass washers, and here's the flexible stainless steel line. And I routed it down through. kind of down back around that little, I don't know if you can see that, there's a kind of a guard. And then down here, you can see how it hooks to the block and it kind of snakes up and it goes between the block and the return pipe. So it's right against the block and out of the way of the heat shield. You will also notice how I washed up the engine bay so that when I do my test run I can look for leaks and they'll be very visible. It's nice and clean. And same on this side. It's all washed up, so any leaks will be very visible. Okay, so what you just saw was a test fire up with all these heat shields off and the catalytic converter hooked up loosely. And I just looked with my flashlight and I don't see any leaks, so that means that this turbo oil line is on well, not leaking. So I'm going to let this thing cool down, pull this back off, bolt the heat shields on with the catalytic converter, and call it done.